Good afternoon. Welcome to each of you to Collegeville Connections, an online series presented by the Collegeville Institute, located on the campus of St. John's University in Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota. Collegeville Connections highlights the work of Collegeville Institute alums and friends from across the spectrum of Collegeville Institute programs. It provides an opportunity for new guests, program alums, and friends to stay connected to each other and to the Collegeville Institute. Most importantly, though, you'll learn a lot about and from our remarkable guests. I'm Carla Durand. I'm on staff at the Collegeville Institute, and I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing our guest speaker for today. But before I get to that, I'll say just a few words about the tech side of things, and we'll share what we need to know about logistics. We are streaming this presentation on two platforms, both Facebook Live and Zoom. We hope to have some time for viewer questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So if you're on Zoom, please add your questions or comments into the Q&A function. And if you are on Facebook Live, please add your comments or questions to the feed. And we have staff members receiving those questions, and they'll direct them into the right hands. So with those logistical tidbits behind us, let's move on to the heart of today's gathering. Today, we're going to hear from author Jonathan Malesic about his latest and hot off the press book, The End of Burnout. Jonathan is an essayist, journalist, scholar, and alumnus of Collegeville Institute's Writing Workshop program. John's writing has been recognized as notable in Best American Essays and Best American Food Writing, and has received special mention in the Pushcart Prize Anthology in 2019. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Republic, Washington Post, America, Commonweal, Notre Dame Magazine, the Hedgehog Review, The Point, Chronicle of Higher Education, and elsewhere. He has been the recipient of major grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Louisville Institute. His first book, Secret Faith in the Public Square, won a Forward Indies Gold Medal for the religion category. John currently lives in Dallas, Texas. Our host for today's conversation about John's new book and the questions it explores is Dr. Jacqueline Bussey, the Executive Director of the Collegeville Institute. And with those introductions, I'll turn it over to Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Carla. Hi, everyone. Hi, John. We're so excited to have you on Collegeville Connections. We've been waiting for this day. What Carla didn't mention in her introduction is that you and I are friends from graduate school. And just for the audience out there today, just wanted to say that John and I have known each other for 25 years. We just figured that out before the webinar started. So, John, I was just going to say that when our staff and I were going over our lineup for the year of the Collegeville Connections, I had heard about your book, and you were at the top of my list of guests to bring, not only because of our deep connection, but also because of your wonderful connection to the Collegeville Institute, which of course we are going to talk about during this hour to come. So your new book is called, I'm going to show it to everybody. It's called The End of Burnout, Why Work Drains Us and How to Build Better Lives. I just finished reading it, everybody, and I highly, highly recommend it. So like Carla was saying, we are going to talk about burnout today. We're going to talk with John about its causes, its roots, and what we can actually do about it in our lives. I think that's probably the most important question. And I was also just going to mention quickly that John was recently featured on Anderson Cooper, which was awesome. And I am no Anderson Cooper, but I think we're going to have just as much fun, right, John, as you and Anderson did. So
certainly, yeah.
That's my hope anyway. Okay, so I just wanted to start with a personal question, John, because I know you, but also because I felt like the parts of the book in which you shared memoir in a memoir kind of way, you shared your personal story. It was so compelling to me. I really appreciated all the research and the way you beautifully interwove all of the personal memoir. But once I got to the personal stuff, I was always like just completely riveted, right? About your own story, because I think it really is going to resonate with a lot of our audience today. And I know it resonated with me. So the question that I have for you is a little backstory, just for everybody listening. It's just that after our time at the University of Virginia, John and I both, we landed kind of what many people would consider dream jobs, tenure track jobs, teaching religion at small liberal arts colleges that were church related. And we both got tenure. And then John did what in our circle of friends was completely unthinkable. John quit. Right, John? You just quit. And I just wanted you to start today by talking to us about why you did that.
Sure. Yeah. And just to, to start, thank you so much, Jacqueline, for moderating this, and, Carla and Stina for putting it together, and just for the Collegeville Institute, for all of the wonderful work that you do, and to all of you attending. It's great to participate in this event with an organization that had an important role in not just in like hosting me and helping me to write the book, but as we'll discuss in the content and the outlook on burnout and its solutions that I have. Yeah, so like you mentioned, Jacqueline, like I had my dream job, and I was a theology professor on the tenure track at a college in Pennsylvania, and I had fully merged who I was with my job. I mean, I all but slept in a tweed blazer, and like the job, it lived up to the dream, at times, certainly. I really felt like I was, living this dream. I literally got to ask college students to discuss questions about the meaning of life. Like I rarely said, what is the meaning of life? But like, those are the kinds of questions that we talked about in class. Yeah. And while I was doing this job, one of the teaching and research questions that interested me most were those questions that arise from our working lives. So work as a spiritual and moral problem. And I taught a class called Why Work for a number of years, where we try to answer those questions, and what the theological and philosophical traditions have to say to help us think through that question. And sometime after I got tenure, that question became much more than academic for me. It became kind of the central existential question of my life. I had my dream job. I had tenure. I had unimaginable job security. Salary benefits were great. I had good colleagues. I had good students, and yet something I had a hard time getting out of bed many mornings. I didn't, or I would get out of bed, and I had arranged my schedule so that my classes started late. So my first class was at like 2:00 in the afternoon on, one day a week, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think. And it was a struggle to get to campus on time for that. I would wake up and I would find that I had to go back to sleep a couple hours. Like something was clearly wrong, and my temper got shorter, and so this is all stuff in the book, of course. Right. And like I can remember, like, talking to you on the phone about this.
Yes, we talked about this.
And I didn't know what to do. And I even took a semester of unpaid leave. So my wife is also an academic, and she was teaching at a college in another state at the time, driving distance, but still, you can't see each other all the time. And so I went and I, lived in her town for a semester just to get away. And
I remember that. Yep.
Yeah, it worked. When I came back, all that rest, 5 months of rest worked for a couple weeks. I was right back where I had started. I was just as miserable as before. Oh. And then, as luck would have it, my wife got a job offer for a great position at a university here in Dallas, Texas. And so I decided, well, that's it. I can quit. This is my chance, and I'll build a new career, basically. And it was in the weeks after I quit that I started to think about, well, what was this? What just happened to me? And the term burnout kind of, presented itself as one possibility. And, being a nerd at heart, I decided to try to understand this problem in my own life by doing research. Okay. So I checked books on burnout out of the library. I started reading all these scientific articles on burnout, and I was like, this makes sense of my situation. And then I started to connect this concept of burnout to my previous research and teaching on the moral and spiritual problems associated with work. And it all kind of started to make sense. And so that's sort of where the book comes from. It's this personal and intellectual approach to try to explain not just what was going on in my own life, but what is going on in our entire culture. And so, here we are. That's the outcome of it.
Here we are. You're in Dallas.
Right, yeah.
You published the book. Yeah. We're having this conversation.
Exactly.
And I think
yes.
That's what's most compelling about it, John. First of all, that you're brave enough to actually tell the true story of your own burnout. But then the way in which it connects with this larger cultural moment is just so timely, and it makes the book so relevant. So thank you for your courage in telling your real story, right? And then for doing all the research around it. So you perfectly led up to the next question I wanted to ask, which is just for everyone listening, burnout is a word that people just use all the time. Everyone's using it in all different disciplines, but what does it really mean? I appreciated how your book actually provided me with a definition and a way to understand it. So what do you mean when you say burnout?
Yeah, what I mean kind of most broadly is burnout is this experience. It's a chronic experience of being stretched between, on the one hand, your ideals for work, and on the other, the reality of your job. Mm-hmm. So you can, if you imagine like your ideals and reality as a pair of stilts, exactly. Yeah. And
I like that metaphor in the book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And if they're lined, if they're parallel, then you can walk forward. I mean, maybe not everyone can, but with practice, in principle, you can walk forward. Yeah. But when they start to diverge, then you have a harder time, and you stretch and you fumble and you may fall. And that experience, and it's specifically, primarily related to your work. So it's the gap between ideals and reality. So that's, like I say, that's kind of a metaphor. Researchers who study burnout measure it along 3 dimensions. Exhaustion is one, and I think one that we're kind of most familiar with. I think we very often, in our cultural conversation, and honestly also in the research very often too, equate burnout with exhaustion. So that's like me unable to get out of bed, or even after 5 months of being away from my job, coming back and the problem recurring. That kind of exhaustion that's related to burnout doesn't go away with rest. The second is cynicism, or sometimes called depersonalization. So that is where you start treating the people that you work with, whether they're coworkers, clients, students, customers, passengers, patrons, whatever, as less than full human. You start seeing them as problems or obstacles rather than the full human beings that they are. In my case, it was, frustration with students, frustration with colleagues. And the third dimension is a diminished sense of professional accomplishment. So you start to feel like your work doesn't matter, like you're not accomplishing anything. And again, in my case, I didn't think my students were learning anything from me. I went into class, they just seemed totally disinterested, and I couldn't do anything to get them interested. And I'm like, well, this is useless. I'm wasting my time and theirs. And so those 3 things together are a classic case of burnout, though there are also partial forms that I think that the best researchers are starting to focus on. So where you exhibit a high level of exhaustion, but maybe not the other two, and so on.
Right, right. I found it really helpful in the book how you said, John, you said that burnout is a spectrum, not a state. And that really helped me because I was like, oh, sometimes I was so exhausted as an academic, all of that. But then the ineffectiveness part, I was like, oh, I didn't experience that, right? So thinking of it as a spectrum was just really helpful. And I'm sure other people have found that so helpful as well. So thank you for that. So
yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. So you also just mentioned the next thing that I wanted to just have you clarify for everybody before we go a little deeper, which is what is burnout culture? Because that's a term that you're using that seems more nuanced than just saying that we're burned out. And what I loved about your book, John, maybe it's because we're both theologians and both nerdy in this way, was that you were really the first person I had heard talk about burnout culture and burnout in a way that was theological. That is a theological problem. It's an ethical problem, spiritual problem, theological problem. So that's my question for you. What is burnout culture and how is it a theological problem?
Yeah. Burnout culture, it means kind of a couple things. One is that we just have the cultural and also economic conditions in our society that are conducive to burnout. So we have very high ideals for work. And the reality of our jobs is, I think, has diminished in general over the last 50 years or so. So that's one. The other is that the values, I guess, like the other part of burnout culture is that we, in a sense, we almost want to burn out. Like we value work in such a way that burnout almost becomes appealing. And the way that I see that is so to get to the kind of theological point, I do sort of buy into Max Weber's thesis about the Protestant ethic. I think that the kind of anxiety that Weber believed was fueling the work ethic in the early years of capitalism, that anxiety is still with us. It doesn't often take the form of religious anxiety. Like not that many people in the United States have that Calvinist anxiety about the destination of their soul that that Weber was looking at. But we still have this anxiety anyway. We have it over status. We have it over, am I a good worker? Am I, talented, or am I talent? We sometimes, talk about ourselves as talent. And that status anxiety fuels the same response. So we feel anxious. Oh my gosh, am I good enough? And how can I prove to myself? How can I quell this anxiety? Well, I need to prove to myself that no, I am good enough. And how do I do that? Well, it's by working really hard. It's the exact same pattern that Weber identifies as a theological problem. And we've just kind of secularized it here in the 20th and into the 21st century, to the point, like I said, that burnout is a badge of honor. Yes. If you have burned out, then you have demonstrated that you were an ideal worker. And it's a kind of martyrdom. We're often expect ourselves or expect others to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of our work. And it's theological, and it's a kind of bad theology ultimately. And I hope we can replace it with something better. Yes. It's an extremely harmful theology. And when I was reading that, I was thinking about how, having been a professor for 20 some years, right? The ways in which I used to joke with my colleagues, I was like, it's like
we have the martyrdom Olympics at work. Who spent the most hours grading over the weekend? Who did the most committee work? Who slept the least? I mean, it was really true, to the point where I actually called it the martyrdom Olympics,
Yeah. Well,
And
or
so
it's like,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
Okay.
It's just a critical, like, a CV, right? Is
Yeah.
your list of accomplishments. It's like a martyrology almost.
It kind of is. That's really scary when you think about it. So one of the quotes that struck me most in the book, I appreciate how you hold a chapter on work saints and work martyrs. I thought, oh my God, I've totally fallen into these categories. But the quote that you had that really made me pause was, our work ethic's ultimate virtue is martyrdom. The true beneficiaries of this sacrifice, though, are the employers. And I was like, oh, I had to set down the book. I'm like, yeah, it's not us. It's almost like we're not the beneficiaries, right? It's almost like you've been tricked into this overwork culture so that you give and give and give, and then you don't have anything left, like for yourself or for your family or your friends. I just felt like that was like, so anyway, I was really, really struck by that. And it seemed to me, though, too, like some of this is changing, right? We're in a cultural moment of the pandemic, and we all are aware of the term, the Great Resignation, right? Which is all of these different folks who are they're quitting. They're doing what you did, John, like kind of en masse. You kind of did it before anyone I knew, but now I have a lot of friends who've done something similar to you, and I really, really admire it, as I've told you before. And
and let me you've made, radical career changes as well. So,
I did.
don't leave yourself out of that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think it was because I was somewhere on the spectrum of what you're talking about. I hadn't reached the point of thinking my work is ineffective. I didn't reach that, but with the exhaustion and the whole martyrdom and the whole culture in the academy of like, you should be lucky to have a job at all. It doesn't matter what your working conditions are. And I'm like, really? Is that really a way to talk to folks about their lives? Right? Yeah. There's really more. And I had loved your quote, burnout culture is an ethical failure, a failure to honor workers' humanity.
Yeah.
And I think working through the pandemic for many of us professors has been not so honoring to our humanity at all times. The risk we were asked to take and, that sort of thing. So but thank you. Yeah, I think this is something we're in together kind of now. I don't have a traditional academic job anymore either. But yeah, can you make that connection then, John, though, for our audience about what's the connection between the pandemic, the Great Resignation, and burnout culture?
Yeah, I think that burnout has become this key word for us to talk about the problems that we've experienced with work due to the pandemic. And of course, the pandemic upended everybody's work. There's no one who's like, oh, it's fine. Steady as she goes, basically. No. And whether it's you started working from home, or tens of millions of people lost their jobs literally overnight, all at once. And often, if you were working at home, you were also an at-home teacher's aide, unpaid, of course. And then for many other workers, work became so much more intense and dangerous. So the pandemic has touched and, like I say, upset everybody's working life. And burnout has kind of become the way that we talk about it. And I think that, the Great Resignation is maybe what I hope it is workers recognizing their own human value as being greater than the jobs that were on offer for them. Workers seem to have quite a bit of market value at the moment. I saw a surprising chart just the other day that normally there are a couple of job seekers for every job opening in the country, and in really tight labor conditions there might be 10 or 20 job seekers per opening. Now there's 0.6, so they're vastly more. I don't know what that would be like. yeah, I mean, there's I guess 1.6, 1.7 jobs per job seeker, right? So that shows
Oh,
that workers have a lot of market power at the moment.
yes.
That market power is not going to last forever.
Mhm.
Uh, but what I hope will happen is that not only this experience of having gone through the pandemic and the awakening to that market value and market power, but that it will also remind workers and their employers of the human value of workers. Because
Mhm.
if we start to think differently about the role of work in people's lives, then workers don't have to, like, that can kind of that can be a support for workers even at moments when they don't have as much market power. So and I mean, in our country, we've lost, 800 some thousand people. Like, there's this recognition, again, perhaps, I don't know for sure, that our lives are fragile and that there's more to them than our work. And yeah, so I hope that we can start by recognizing the dignity of not just the worker, but the person before they ever go to work. And that I hope is going to be the foundation for a new culture that can, like I call it, counterculture, that can challenge burnout culture.
Mhm. I just love that point. I think the idea that our dignity and our meaning and our purpose does not come exclusively from work and from doing. And think of how many people then get excluded from dignity if being a worker is what gives us dignity. It's horrible. It is a
Yeah.
theological problem at the deepest level. Think of who
Yeah.
all gets excluded. I just even was, my mind was thinking as I was reading your book about the ways in which, in our country, only people who are working are entitled to healthcare. Like, that's not true in other nations across the world. And to think that that's your ticket to health care. And then really, it gives you all these health problems the way that we're part of this culture of overwork. It's mind blowing when you really start thinking about the hamster wheel that we're in. Like, the cover of your book has that,
Yeah.
like a person in a hamster wheel. And I'm like, yes, that's completely, I think a lot of us resonate with that. We feel that on certain days.
Yeah.
I think that's really true. So that makes me think of another one of the quotes from your book, John, that just made me like have to set the book down and take a deep breath because of the truth that I felt I was seeing on the page. So two of the quotes that gave me the most pause relate exactly to what you just said. One of them was this: in the present day work ideology, your accomplishments matter less than your constant effort towards your next accomplishment. And related to that, but maybe even phrased in more of a way that kind of makes you gasp, is the American work ethic demands you prove yourself through labor, but you never prove yourself once and for all. You have to do it all again the very next day. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah. And I think that's where that anxiety comes from.
Yeah.
Again, like, at least according to Weber, we could probably get into a real theological debate over, if he got Calvinist theology right. I think regardless of if he got the theology right, he absolutely got the moral psychology right. And if you like the Calvinist in Weber's argument can never rest easy that they've done enough. It's always in
Never enough.
question,
Yeah.
right? Because it's always up to God, right? And what is the mind of God? Well, if I keep working, I'll find out, and I'll get a little bit more security and a little bit more maybe. And yeah, I mean, I think that works the same way in our work culture. And the historical figure who I connect to that is Booker T. Washington, who I think is like, to me, he's not studied a lot. He's not written a lot. You don't hear people, talk a lot about him anymore, but he's a really fascinating and tragic figure in my view. And he fully embodied this ethic, trying to start, one of the first and one of the longest lasting historically Black universities, the Tuskegee University in Alabama. And it required a lot of work. It required a lot of fundraising. And Washington writes about this anxiety that he felt. He was unable to sleep. He says the anxiety weighed upon him at like 10,000 pounds per square inch or something like that.
Wow.
And
Jeez.
so what he did is like, all right, well, I got to go on the road. I got to raise money. And if you are, if you are in a position to be a fundraiser,
Mhm.
and guess what?
I am.
Then, there's never enough. Like, you
It's
can't,
never enough. No.
you can always exceed whatever, you set a goal and you meet it, and, you can't say, all right, we're good, because there's always more, you want to do.
Mhm.
And, this kind of starts getting into questions, not just of ideals, I think, but also finitude. And, I've been happy to see on my book's Amazon page, like a book, it's too far away for me to grab off the shelf, but a book that is people often buy with
Yours?
with
Yeah. What is
mine
it?
it's Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals.
Oh, wow.
It's
Okay.
about it's about like starting by recognizing finitude and recognizing that you will always be able to imagine more than you'll ever be able to accomplish. And then you're kind of like, okay, well, what are the things I legitimately can? And I think that, that itself is also a component, or it mirrors burnout culture. Because, right, like there's never enough. You've never proven yourself fully and finally. We often have very short memories for people's accomplishments, and we ourselves have short memories of our own accomplishments. Like, friends have asked me, and I have asked myself, all right, well, what's the next book going to be?
I was just going to say that. Everybody always asks me that when I was speaking on my book. I'm like, my book is a newborn. Like, I am at home taking care of the newborn, it's like
Yeah.
asking, are you going to have another kid? Like, right away.
Right.
Because everyone, like every time I speak on my book, they're like, what are you working on now?
Yeah.
And it's such a well-intentioned question, but it does
Yes.
buy into this culture of it's not enough to just have done this. So
Yeah.
I think you have to watch out, John, because authors, they can have burnout just like a professor.
Oh,
The
yeah.
pressure starts coming in, right? What's the next project? Your agent wants you to write a different thing. So it's just something to think about. So I made a note to myself, I'm not going to ask him about the next book, because that's buying into burnout culture. So
All right.
I'm not asking about that at all. I just love this book. So, okay. So I think now that we've suitably understood the problem, I want us to move into solutions, what we can do. I know that everybody who's watching us now, John, is thinking, but what can I do? I don't want to be part of a culture that just thinks that our worth is based on our work, right? We're more than this. So I loved reading your book because I saw pages in it where I was reading it at the Collegeville Institute, and you're talking about the Collegeville Institute and the time that you had spent there. We're located on the grounds of St. John's Abbey, Benedictine monastery, and you talked about that. So I was wondering if you could share your views on what we could do to change and maybe even cure a burnout culture based on some of the things you learned while at the Collegeville Institute.
Right. Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to take part in 2 summer workshops. The first one was really instrumental in helping me make the transition from academic writing to the kind of writing that I do now. And then a couple of years after that, in the summer of 2019, I was there for the apart seminar, and our writing coach there, Michael McGregor, was awesome. And, I can remember having not just discussion, but almost arguments with him about, how to write this book. And because I had an idea that but it should work this way. And he's like,
No.
it's not.
Right,
Got to
right,
do it a different way.
Yeah.
And yeah, while I was there, I interviewed several monks of St. John's Abbey, as well as a number of sisters in St. Joseph, at the St. Benedict's monastery. And the reason is that the Benedictines have this 1,500-year history of reflection and practice in integrating work into their lives in a way that preserves the primacy of prayer in their lives. And I've been drawn to that. I've taught, the rule of St. Benedict, which is within reach. I believe this is published by the Liturgical Press. And I had taught, from the rule of St. Benedict. I'd shown, what's that movie, Integrate Silence, to show it sort of in action in my classes. And so before I spoke to the Benedictines in central Minnesota, I visited a monastery in New Mexico, the Monastery of Christ in the Desert, where the monks there are really trying to live to the letter of the rule of Benedict, and they live pretty far from, pretty far off the grid.
Yeah.
And so they are able to spend the full amount of time in prayer that Benedict prescribed. So 5 or 6 hours of communal prayer per day. They chant the Psalms very slowly and deliberately. And, me as a, mass goer at a large urban Catholic parish, I'm like, come on, let's go. We got to get through these Psalms. Let's do it. That's completely the wrong approach. And so I thought, well, the monks in New Mexico, they're kind of a limit case. I wanted to visit them to see what would be, how far away could I get from burnout culture and stay in the United States? And that was sort of like the limit. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from those limit cases. I said, okay, a lot of readers are going to think that is not practicable in their own lives. I thought, well, how are Benedictines who are more engaged with the world, how do they live out these Benedictine principles? And so that's what I wanted to talk with the monks and the sisters about. How have they done this? And in some cases, these are people who have very busy work lives. There's one sister, she's now retired from active ministry, but I mean, she was juggling massive responsibilities, at the college, in her community. She was studying for an MBA at one point. And she said that when she joined the order in the 50s or 60s, she said the motto wasn't, ora et labora. It was ora et labora et labora et labora. So it's, prayer and work and work and work. Even so, she and the other, sisters and monks didn't talk about burnout. There was only one monk I had spoken with who said that he had experienced burnout, and it was in a different career than the one he has now. And it's not that Benedictines have some magic spiritual power that prevents burnout. What they have is a community. They have a set of rules that limit work and honors their dignity, so that it lowers the stakes of work in a whole lot of different ways. The vow of stability of life is kind of reflected in a reciprocal vow where the community pledges to support the monk or the sister
Yeah.
for the rest
Even
of
if
their
they can't work,
lives.
even if they can't work, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like so there's you're just thinking about, I mean, this is something I didn't think enough about in the book. And I think that, ought to be thought about more, or just models of retirement.
Yeah.
The model of like one monk I spoke with said, and I off the top of my head, I can't remember who it was, said that, Benedictines never retire. They just get another job. And what they get is responsibility within the community that is adapted to what they're capable of doing. And, it may be lighter duty than they had before, but as people in Collegeville know, there are, Benedictines who are very engaged into their 90s.
Yes. I have met
And
some.
it looks from the one perspective, it might look like, oh my gosh, well, they never retire. They have to work all the time and all that. But I think what it actually is that there's a recognition of the dignity and the value that the person has to the community at every age. When they're, they may not be, bringing in a lot of income at that point, but they still have something to contribute. The community still needs them. Even if, and then just sort of my last point about this, sorry, I could talk about Benedictines and work all day.
I like that. We like hearing that at the Collegeville Institute, so it's fine.
But the last thing, and I wrote a kind of like a follow-up essay for Notre Dame magazine that goes into this a little further, is this ministry of prayer that the sisters at St. Benedict's Monastery have, particularly at their retirement convent in St. Cloud. So you go to the monastery website, there's, a form you can fill out to request prayers. And there is a sister whose job it is to collect these prayers, to kind of often communicate with the person requesting them to figure out what exactly it is they're praying for. And then she coordinates these and brings them to sisters at the retirement convent. So these are sisters who need a lot of nursing care often, but they have something to contribute too. The community needs them as much as they are needed, as much as they need the community. And, that, I don't know, like that just is so different from the way that, we think about retirement in the secular world. And so again, I just think there's a lot that the rest of us could learn from Benedictines and other vowed religious on this question.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's true, even if we're not monastics, right?
Yeah.
I think having a culture of appreciation could really go a long ways in the academy, in the corporate world. I loved how you wrote in the book, you gave some solid examples, right, John, of nonprofits that actually practice actively a culture of appreciation. I would say that so often we suffer from a culture of underappreciation at work because it's so competitive rather than collaborative. And so people don't feel appreciated because everyone's fighting for that one little slice of the pie, right? And to keep their job, and everyone feels uncertain and unstable. But I like this idea that we can actually practice a culture of appreciation anytime we want. And that can be instituted, within any organization. And I think that's really powerful. Yeah. I like that. Okay. We do have some Q&A coming in the chat. So I want to make sure that we have time for that. And then I also could talk about this all day. So I have other questions if we need them, but we do have one. It's actually right now I'm looking, looks really interesting in the Q&A. And here it is, John. You write that a new shared vision of how work fits into a life well lived will, quote, affirm that we find our highest purpose in leisure, not work. How can congregational leaders help people to recognize the importance of leisure and equip them to make leisure an integral part of their lives? I think you might be on mute, John. I can't hear you that well. There you go. Sorry.
All right. Yes, I
There
had
you go. Okay,
temporarily
you're back,
muted the
you're
mic.
back, you're back. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yes, that is an important question.
Yeah.
And I think that the one way to start is by, talking about, or I mean, even like preaching about about how work, the place that work occupies in scripture, for instance. Again, I'm, Roman Catholic. Perhaps there's a strange kind of like Catholic bias in what I'm saying, or a peculiarity of my experience. But I mean, I've heard, I don't know, a couple of sermons in my life that directly address the role of work in our lives. I mean, we spend so much time at work, and yet there's very little preaching on it. Even though read the Gospels. So many of the parables are the metaphors are drawn from the world of work. It's right at the beginning in Mark, the call of the first disciples. Jesus calls them, and in like Christian theology of work, it's often like, oh, well, this is what vocation is about, and it gets connected to work. It's like, no. Jesus is calling those guys away from their work. It's like, oh, you're busy at work, you're doing all this stuff, you have all these cares related to your working life, and he says, stop. He's saying, quit your job and follow me. And there's so much rich potential to talk about in the Gospels. So that's one place to start. I think another is, clergy burnout is certainly a significant problem, and part of the problem is so many clergy work in relative isolation. And have quite a bit of responsibility heaped upon them. But clergy need to perhaps open the conversation with their parish councils and others in their congregations about burnout, about what is expected of them, what their motivation was for going into ministry, how the congregation is supporting that, how it might not be, and I don't know, hopefully not think of the pastor and other ministers as your employees, but as people who are part of the community, who are performing an important function and need to be able to perform that function satisfactorily for them as well as for the congregation over a long period of time. And additionally, there's so many, I don't know. This is part of why I wrote the book, is that there aren't so many really good books and other resources on theology and work to talk about. There are some, but discussions and stuff like that, where people are able to connect the challenges and triumphs that they're having at work to their spiritual lives.
And I think this is a place, right, where interreligious conversations could be of such a gift to Christians, and have certainly been a gift to me when we think about the Sabbath, right? And we think about the way, for example, our Jewish friends actually honor the Sabbath. I have so much holy envy for my Jewish friends who are like, this phone, it's Friday at sundown, you can't reach me. You cannot reach me. I will not be working. I won't be touching anything like this, a laptop, a phone. I'm just like, how do they do that? I just think it's so beautiful. And I was talking to my rabbinic friend the other day, John, you'll appreciate this story. And she was talking about the Sabbath, and I was still like kind of stuck in a burnout culture mind. And I was like, I just don't know how you can rest when you have so much work to do, that sort of thing. And she was like, well, she said, the thing about the Sabbath is you have to understand that you are not resting because the work is done. You're resting as if it were done. And I was like, Oh, because like when I try to go on vacation, I'm like hustling to get all my work done so then I can go and
Right.
actually relax on my vacation. Of course, that never works because you can never get it all done. And then your
Yeah.
vacation is because you're still thinking about work on the vacation. And I was like, oh, it was a revolutionary thing that she taught me in
Yeah.
that conversation about the Sabbath. And I would think, don't you think, John, some good solid preaching on the Sabbath and what
Yeah.
it is in the scriptures could be such a great gift to congregations.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would-
Well, you made me think of a couple more points in answer to that
okay.
previous question. I mean, one was that, more wisdom from Benedictines. So in New Mexico, the work period starts at 9 a.m. and runs until 12:40 p.m. And it ends with, the chapel bell rings and the monks are supposed to stop what they're doing and, they have the next office to move on to. And I asked, and then it's not like they don't go back to work generally after that. They'll start again at 9 the next day. And I asked one monk, and this is someone who had worked as a defense attorney. So he had known the burnout culture very well before he joined the monastery. I said, what do you do if the work period ends and it feels like your work is undone? And his answer was, you get over it. And that sounds a lot like your friend was saying.
Yeah.
That it's like,
yeah.
I mean, like getting over it struck me. That's a spiritual discipline that we need.
That's beautiful.
And I think, like, again, going back to the question of the Sabbath, is that you're only able to do that, to practice those spiritual disciplines of getting over it or practicing the Sabbath, if you've got other people who are also in the same boat and who understand that, the meaning of it and why you're doing it and how difficult it is. And if you can, there's perhaps another thing that congregations can do is start to make it feel less weird to, truly have a day of rest a week and other kinds of spiritual disciplines like that.
Yeah, it's really powerful stuff. I just remember thinking, I can remember saying a story. I was talking to my students once. We were talking about the culture of work. And I was like, if you walked outside and you saw me or the president of this college sitting under a tree reading a book, what would you think? Would you think I was working? Because I mean, clearly this is a college. I would be working, the president would be working. And we all know that, and all my students laugh because they was like, no one would think that. You'd be like, oh, look at them, just relaxing, just reading a book under a tree. I mean, it's like, like we are our own worst enemies. Like we're creating this culture. We buy into it completely. If you saw me reading a book, would you think I was working? Of course I'm working. I was reading your book all weekend, right? So it's like, it's just, I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. And we have an interesting comment, John, from our Facebook followers who are watching us live stream. One of them mentions the book Leisure, the Basis of Culture, which is hilarious because, of course, I read that at the University of Virginia in a class with you. Do you remember that? So Facebook follower, thank you for the comment. It's a great book. Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And John and I actually read it together in school, and I was deeply influenced by it. And you do mention that the author of that book says, if we don't get leisure right, we can't get work right.
Right. Yeah, right. And the main thesis of the book is right there in the title, that leisure needs to come first.
Yeah.
It is debatable if communal prayer kind of counts as leisure. Pieper kind of thinks that it would. He says that the highest form of leisure is divine worship, and that needs to come first in our lives, and then work kind of fills in the rest. And I mean, that book was enormously influential on my thinking. I've taught it many times. Students often, I mean, Pieper isn't always the easiest to read, but even when he is, what he's saying is it's unfathomable to people. So which means we probably need to read and discuss that book a lot more. another one along the same lines that I would recommend is Abraham Joshua Heschel's book, The Sabbath, which
Yes, love it.
makes
Yeah.
a similar argument and is just as great.
Absolutely. So we have another comment from one of our Facebook attendees. It says, getting over it is a spiritual discipline. Love this, all caps. It's like, me too, whoever you are. I'm totally with you. I'm going to be thinking about that for the rest of the week. Yeah,
Good.
that's really good. So we have just a couple more minutes, John, before we're going to have to wrap up. Sadly, where did the hour go? I know. But my question is just quickly, we talked a lot about monastics, but the point you make in the book is that burnout is not an individual problem. It's not just about you. If you're a person who's watching us talk about this today and you're like, oh my God, it's me. No, like the point of John's book is it's not you. This is about institutions. This is about a culture. It's about employers. It's about a culture of work. So that makes me think, John, if it's not just about us, what are some other solutions if we're not monastics, right?
Yeah.
So we're not going to pray 7 times a day, maybe, but what are some solid things that we could do? Hobbies. I know you mentioned a couple things like that. Can you just wrap up for us of some really solid, concrete things we can do?
Sure. Yeah. And, part of the problem with this is that it's because the causes of burnout are cultural and institutional. There's not like a problem with you. There's a problem generally outside of you. And so the solution can't be an individual one either. Your, meditation practice may be valuable for a lot of reasons. It's probably not going to be enough to cure burnout because the cause is not a solitary one. And so, we have to start by talking with the people who we work for, about these issues. We have to start talking about, well, what are our ideals for work? What did we want to get out of work? How do we imagine it should fit into our lives? Maybe some of those ideals are faulty. They're perhaps well-intentioned, but misguided. We need to talk about the conditions of our work. Again, not just with coworkers, but I would say with, superiors and with clients and customers. I have this vision of, an organization like a school or something like that, getting together and saying, well, what, even in getting together with its constituency and saying, what are we doing here? Are we doing more than we need to? What are the things that we're doing that are causing us to burn out? Because the fact is, if I'm burning out, it's very likely that other people I'm working with are too.
Absolutely.
And we have to have those I don't know what the exact steps to take are, but the first, I think, is conversation about it.
And you also mentioned in the book, having hobbies, having other things that you do that define you, that form your identity.
Right.
I think it's important. You also mentioned some policy changes that could need to happen, maybe shorter work weeks, universal wages, right? So just in case people are thinking that you don't also address policy, you absolutely do, right? And so I encourage them to read the book to learn more about that. Well, I just want to honor everyone's time here today. And I just want to say, John, I've enjoyed this conversation so much.
Yeah, thanks. Me too.
To see you again. It's been way too long. What a perfect excuse for me to get to talk to you for an hour. So thank you so much for that. So, John, do you have just any final word of wisdom before we invite Carla back on to kind of close us out?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I guess, I think that it's just, have these conversations so that we can all learn to get over it.
Great. Carla, we invite you back on to kind of say goodbye to us.
Oh gosh, thank you, John. Thank you, Jacqueline, so much for this wonderful conversation. And thanks to all of you for joining us online today. And we do invite you to join us for future Collegeville Institute Connection events. So please keep an eye on our website and our social media for registration and information details. Later this month, just 2 weeks from now, on Tuesday, February 15th, this is a bit of a change. Typically, we have our webinars on Wednesdays. This coming webinar will be Tuesday, February 15th, same time, noon to 1 Central. We will have a conversation with Dr. Claire Wolfteich, who is a professor of practical theology and spirituality studies at Boston University School of Theology. And she will be speaking to us about Sabbath practices. So this really will be building on today's conversation, which is wonderful. So Dr. Wolfteich will help us explore both the gifts and the challenges of Sabbath in our own contexts and callings. And so with that, we thank you again, John. We thank you again, Jacqueline. And thanks to all of you for joining us. And we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, John.